Hi, this is Paul. There's been so much incredible content put out. I just saw that Jordan Peterson just released a conversation with Ian McGilchrist, which I haven't had a chance to watch this afternoon. It's Monday right now. Little while, we're going to have the April 1st steel cage match, which of course Grim Grizz set up and challenged us all to. And really looking forward to that. Looking forward to that conversation. I made some new branding for it, so if you haven't seen the conversation, you can see the first few minutes. Yeah, that's branding I made when last week I took a little trip down to the desert and was able to get up and over Tahoe down the Eastern Sierra, which is 395 from Tahoe to from Tahoe all the way down to Death Valley, one of my favorite roads in the world, just an incredible road. Jonathan Peugeot had a really good conversation with Justin Brierley. Now, their previous one that they did on Seen and Unseen was also excellent. And that one probably had more new stuff in from Jonathan, but this one had some really interesting tidbits too, more on Justin Brierley's project. Now, Justin sort of tells the story of watching the world go, watching this whole conversation about religion move on in the culture. And of course, he had a front row seat for it. And he often starts the story with Elevator Gate, that this was sort of the undoing of new atheism. And I think he really summarizes it well here.
People who were formerly happy bedfellows like Dillahunty and Dawkins now are not on speaking terms any longer. Dawkins got his Humanist of the Year award rescinded by the American Humanist Association because he's been quite outspoken on transgender and so on. And so you find then this weird sort of changing where actually suddenly secular atheists, kind of more conservative minded folk, kind of then seem to sort of form alliances with Christians who maybe are kind of sympathetic to those issues, and you find that the secular atheists who are kind of more on the woke side kind of suddenly they're kind of more in keeping with their kind of other woke brethren. So it's a kind of, it felt like the game changed quite a bit once the culture wars came and just kind of messed up everyone's categories, and they realized we're not sure we actually agree with each other on anything after all.
And so what to you is the most, like, when you hear these characters that talk about their return to Christianity, or they're coming close to Christianity, what is the thing that's most salient to you that pops out as, this is what's going on in these transformations, because they're happening all at the same time. So it's like, it's not just an individual thing. There's something happening in the culture.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a few different things going on. I think one kind of, in a sense, small part of it, and I think it was just symptomatic in some ways, the new atheist movement kind of coming and rising and falling, is that generally there is this, meaning crisis in our culture, which you and many others have pointed out. And it's on the basis of the fact that people have lost a story essentially to live in. And the story that materialist secularism offered has just not proved capable of building a flourishing, meaningful life for people. And so what I see is a lot of these secular thinkers now sort of realizing that the atheist project is kind of dead on its feet. And so they're basically just saying, well, look, let's look around and see what's here. And oh, hey, it turns out the Christian story has actually provided people that sense of meaning, purpose, and identity for millennia. And they're just willing to give it a second look, in all honesty. And it's almost like they had to go through, some of these folk, I think, a kind of teenage atheist phase almost, before they kind of came out on the other side, realizing, there are other ways to understand the world than just this kind of very one-dimensional, flat, science explains everything kind of mode of thinking. And so, yeah, I do draw out the stories of a number of those people, some of whom have kind of crossed the line.
And I think Jonathan, actually, one of the things I liked about the conversation that Justin and, I keep forgetting her name, on Seen and Unseen, what they hosted is when Jonathan sort of pointed out that their modernists sort of live in one mode, and it's the mode is, well, I call, of course, the monarchical vision. It's an abstraction. Now, one of the biggest things to come through was a conversation that I had sort of skipped. I thought, okay, Michael Schellenberger and Jordan Peterson talking about the whole transitioning children thing. I'm not that. What are they going to talk about? And then one of you sent me the conversation starting here. And I haven't listened to the Daily Wire exclusive part yet to see what's in there, but this was astounding. This was one of the more remarkable pieces. Now, I just looked at the Roman Catholic thing with Tammy's. I assume because it was Easter, Tammy was probably brought into the Roman Catholic Church, and they did a conversation with Jordan Peterson. I made a comment on Twitter about please, please, please be Roman Catholic, and Jordan actually says something in that conversation which I thought was tremendously revealing in terms of how he sees himself. But this was an astounding conversation here with Michael Schellenberger.
Right. So this has been going on for a very long time.
Yeah. So so it seems like if I agree with your assessment. So what do you think then, how would you describe the way forward? It seems like you have to find some secular way to affirm that everybody's born into the right body, that there's biological differences, that everybody has the right to puberty, that nobody shall be denied the right to puberty. But I think you're right. The nihilism, until we address it with some life-affirming, pro-human vision, and I know I'm a person of faith. You're a person of faith, but I recognize also I'm in a secular society. So I mean, how do you answer the question?
Now this is the question of the day. It really is. As background to that Peterson conversation, you really have to see Michael Schellenberger with Peter Boghossian with his Spectrum Street epistemology.
So I think Christianity works better. Christianity has better outcomes
than
the alternatives.
All of them?
No, most of them. I think that there's a small number of people that can handle atheism, and I know all of you. And I'm friends with all of them.
Okay, here we are. Where are we, sir?
Okay, and that whole conversation was really very good.
Of how do you make this case for a pro-human, life-affirming vision in a society that's so secular and
Michael,
so
I
nihilist?
don't think there is a secular reform.
Okay.
I think we're at the end of the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the secular experiment has collapsed. I think it's collapsed because it's technically wrong. The book I've just published, or will publish in November, the one I'm touring about, is the book is We Who Wrestle with God. And I make an elaborate case for this. I think the evidence now, this is the scientific evidence, by the way, the evidence is overwhelming that we see the world through a structure of value. And the description of a structure of the description of the structure of value of a person is a story. That's what a story is. So when you go to a movie and you watch someone characterized, what you're seeing is the embodiment of their value structure. And you want to see that because you need a value structure to orient yourself in the world. That's what makes you pay attention to one thing rather than another, because attention itself is value predicated. And the monotheistic hypothesis is that all values unify at the pinnacle and that people should orient themselves towards that. And I think there's every reason to assume that that's exactly right. I also think it's irreplaceable.
What do you say? How do you? So you and I have a lot of mutual friends that are that self-describe as atheists.
Yeah.
Our friend Steve Pinker. I have a lot of my supporters are atheists. Michael Shermer. So there's obviously some, and they're not nihilists, right? And they're very pragmatic and very sensible. So do you just sort of think, well, they're a minority of folks that are not overwhelmed by the nihilism of life, and they have a way to affirm it despite their atheism? Or do you feel like how do you reconcile?
I mean, how are they managing it?
Well, I guess it's both. It's not just a personal question. I also think I'm asking a political question, which is, it seems like if we need to get a majority on our side on these issues, and you're in a secularizing society, how do you build those alliances?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have an answer for that. I mean, what I'm trying to do is to tell a better story.
Now, there's so much in this video. And I didn't really watch much of it until they got to this point. Now, of course, I'm using different language than he is. I don't know that the Enlightenment ends. I think the Enlightenment gets subsumed. I'm going to have my second conversation with Brendan this week, and I think we're going to dig a lot more deeper into this, probably more productively than we did last time. It was interesting with our first talk. Part of the reason I always begin my conversations the way I do, and part of the reasons it's a little bit easier with Randos, is because most of the people who are really clamoring to have a conversation with me have watched a fair amount of my content already. And because my channel really isn't that big, it's bigger than some, but because it isn't that big, many of the people who come into conversation with me have a decent sense of where I'm at, and Brandon didn't. Now, I always talk about it in terms of the recession of modernity, and that modernity has sort of reached a high water mark, but the layers that have always been here, sort of covered up by modernity, are now being seen again. And what we are doing now is renegotiating a whole bunch of things that were assumed to have been settled within modernity and now are no longer settled. The difficulty that is going on here is that I like the nomenclature used by Simone and and Malcolm about an urban monoculture. I like that nomenclature because basically what happened was the urban monoculture had a whole bunch of code within it that everybody sort of adopted, usually sort of as the civil rights movement progressed, and everybody sort of assumed that and said, here we have to undo the wrongs that were built into society with Jim Crow. You can look at my last conversation with Cale Zeldin with respect to this. Everybody sort of assumed, and myself included in many ways, sort of an implicit progressivism. And the reason that, let's say, Jordan Peterson was attacked and many others have been attacked is because, not because necessarily they changed any positions, but because they have stepped away from the implicit progressivism. And the implicit progressivism had really not only a fair amount of sort of postmodern ideology combined with a particular political activism, but they also sort of took a lot of the things that modernity sort of turned a blind eye to and said, you never have to look at this again. And what happened was the scientists kept looking and began to discover, as Jordan Peterson said, it isn't. Now, Schellenberger comes along and says, well, what are you going to do politically? And Peterson basically says, I don't really know. And he's right. And what's interesting with Peugeot and Brierley, when they say, what does Christianity look like going forward? Well, they don't really know. Now, I actually do have a fair amount of thoughts about this. I don't know either. But my thinking is none of us will know until as we watch it emerge from Christians and the church. I think for the last 30 years, the major aspect of theology that has been under serious renegotiation and conversation has been ecclesiology. What does that mean? Ecclesiology is the study of the church. That it's ecclesiology that has been the part of Christianity theologically that many people have been playing with. And I think the American experiment in orthodoxy that Jonathan and Justin were talking about is deeply into this. But of course, there's going to be political registers with this as well.
And, that has a certain impact. And that's the right way to do it, because I think the right way forward is always invitation. The right way forward is invitation.
And when Jordan says this, it's so key and so important. And it's actually very much Jesus. Because if you look at the culture war that Jesus was surrounded with, I was just playing with Twitter and published the famous sketch from Monty Python about the Judean People's Front, or the People's Front of Judea, or the Popular Front of Judea. I mean, on and on and on that they talked about that. Monty Python understood something about the context of Jesus' ministry in their movie The Life of Brian, that, well, people wanted to get rid of the Romans, and they were looking for someone who would get rid of the Romans. And so when Brian's running around selling, things in the stands, and they're having their little cluster about the Judean People's Front, well, you're selling these things for what I have to, and on they go. Well, the thing that frustrated Jesus' followers was this invitational thing. That's my pet reason for why Judas bails and sells out and betrays, is exactly on this point, because they basically said, Jesus, you can't win if you keep it invitational. You have to coerce. You have to use the power of the sword. And Jesus is very clear. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Well, Jesus died by the sword, but he didn't live by the sword. And actually, he rises from the dead. Again, we just had Easter. So this point that he makes is really important. But this is sort of throwing a whole bunch of things into confusion.
And so if you can't tell a better story, then you don't win the contest. What's the best story? Well, look, the leftist story is one of power, right? The postmodernists discovered that we see the world through a structure of value, which is partly why they've been able to kind of scuttle the scientific enterprise, because raw empiricism doesn't work. This is partly why the Enlightenment has to come to an end. You cannot...
Now, again, he says so much here that if you sort of pause at every phrase, you can actually make a point. Raw empiricism doesn't work. Why doesn't raw empiricism work? We've talked about this endlessly. You hear Peugeot talk about it. You hear Peterson talk about it. You hear Vervaeke talk about it. It's combinatorial explosiveness. He just basically said, this empiricism that in the Enlightenment they thought they were wielding, it wasn't what they thought it was. There was a filter in there, and that filter was basically a value hierarchy. That's how you paid attention. That's what you paid attention to, because there are too many facts in the world. And he's going to go, he said, every fact is a narrative. Now, you could play with that a little bit and adjust that, because is it a little micro narrative, or is it just a little bit of it? It's just got little tendrils connected to much bigger narratives, and out they go from there.
Not orient yourself with knowledge of the facts. And the reason for that is that there's an infinite number of facts. You have to organize the facts. And as soon as you organize them, you're in a value hierarchy. So the postmodernists figured that out, which is why, and it's so interesting because most of them were literary critics, right? They were critics of story. They knew there was something key to the story. Well, the problem with the postmodernists wasn't that they got that right, and that was a major accomplishment, but they leaped immediately to the assumption, because of their Marxism, they leaped immediately to the assumption that the fundamental story was one of power.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and you can understand why that's an attractive story. It's easy to understand. You can understand every human dynamic in relationship to power. Plus, when interpersonal dynamics, marriage, business, society, when they become corrupt, they do become corrupt in the direction of power. So it's a powerful diagnostic observation, but it's wrong. So you might say, well, if the story isn't one of power, what's the story? And I know what the story is.
Well, before he gets to the story, he's exactly right here, because power looks, well, it's self-evident. People are doing things. They are motivated to do things for certain reasons, and it's just sort of it's sort of cynical. Well, they want to do it for power. I remember in high school English class when we were all little budding Marxists in our Christian schools and we didn't know it. Why did this, the English teacher would say something, well, why, trying to get us to think a little bit. Well, why did this author write this? Because they wanted to sell books. That's just sort of the economic excuse of power. And the English teacher kind of rolls their eyes. And the English teacher wants to say, well, actually, especially people who make a little money already, they're doing it for something more. There's a deeper, more meaningful motivation that people have beyond power. And you can see this because people do all sorts of things that are not in the best interest of their financial or power dynamics. Not just because they're dumb or haven't thought it through, but because there are things that people care about more. Things that in a materialist frame, they really have no business caring about more, like what is the world going to be after you die? Vervaeke always uses that question as sort of a tester.
The story is one of voluntary sacrifice. That's the story. And the Christian mythos got that exactly right, as far as I can tell. And so the reason for that is that community itself is a sacrificial operation. To become a member of a community, you sacrifice yourself. That's the definition of community. Now, you might be able to sacrifice yourself in a manner that benefits you and everyone else.
Now, and that's really key, because if you're, let's say, a pastor of a church, you recognize that how do you gain status in a church community? You want to know how? I watch it all the time. You're sacrificial towards the community. And that comes in a lot of different things. Some people might have more time than money, so they give a lot of their time, and then everybody values them. Or they might have more money than time, and so they give a lot of money, so everybody values them. And now, if they give a lot of money and then they start trying to use that to manipulate the community, well, then suddenly they lose status. And you see this all the time in a church community. And church communities are fun like this, as opposed to, let's say, a business community or your coworkers. Because in a church community, generally speaking, the whole thing is organized, at least ostensibly, towards a higher purpose together. So when you watch them work in a church community, it becomes a little bit more obvious. Sure, people are playing status games, people are playing power games, people have all sorts of things within themselves, and as a pastor, you watch them work through all these things, but this is the kind of thing that's happening.
Right? That would be the highest form of self-sacrifice. That's what God calls Abraham to do when God calls Abraham to adventure. He offers him a sacrificial path forward.
And of course, almost every church has what in the front of it. If it's a Protestant church, they'll have an empty cross. And if it's a Catholic church, they'll have a crucifix. That's right at the front of the church. That's what everyone's attention is focused on. That is the key thing. The whole community is around sacrifice. And when churches betray that, people stop believing in that particular church or maybe in that denomination. That's part of the reason why in the Roman Catholic Church, the pedophile priest scandal was so absolutely destructive, because it basically said they're not really there because of that cross in front.
That would be optimally beneficial to him and to everyone else. And so there's an equation in that story of the call to the adventure of sacrificial transformation and the simultaneous establishment of social harmony. And I think that's right. And that's not power. And I think the country that got that most right has been the United States, right? Is that people have their responsibility. They bear that responsibility. That's they work, because work is sacrifice. It's the sacrifice of the present to the future. So it's voluntary self-sacrifice is the right basis for community. And
now, it's interesting that he notes the United States and not necessarily the British Commonwealth, let's say. The United States is... I want to get to a little bit of what he says about ARC here, and then I want to go to the other. Let's see. Let's play a little bit more, then I'll go to the other video.
The image of the crucifixion is that. That's why it's on the altar. That's why it's at the center of the church. That's why the church is the center of the community. That's all dramatized. And it's right. And it's the antithesis of the claim that power unites. Now, what it means that that's right, that shades off into the ineffable. Like, I don't know, like, human beings are communal animals. What does that mean metaphysically or theologically? Well, that's where human knowledge meets its limit. You can't say in the final analysis.
And Jordan, what's the difference? So Jazz Jennings' mom really sacrificed her son for something.
What's
the difference of, yeah, exactly. So what is the difference between that sacrifice that they're doing. They're sacrificing others for themselves, I guess you would say, rather than sacrificing
it's
some
worse
part
than
of
that.
themselves for
No,
others.
no, it's worse than that. It's worse than that. No, first of all, that's a very astute question, and second, you're not pessimistic enough in your analysis. So, because it's not that they're exactly sacrificing, say, their children to themselves. It's that they're sacrificing their children to the narrowest of their whims and their demand for prideful power. Right. So it's mythologically speaking, it's a Luciferian sacrifice. Right. Because you might say, well,
and I wouldn't agree with that. I think actually it's much more that they are sacrificing to a false god. That a false god has inhabited this particular vision. There's something, and again, I'm using, I almost pulled a Jordan Peterson, but I don't really think that. It's not, again, you can use a minimalist argument like Jordan is doing and saying there's something at the top of their value hierarchy and they're pursuing it. But I want to get beyond that to,
well, they're gaining. It's like, wait a minute, who are you? I mean, that did she get out? First implanted her spirit.
I mean, it's secularized.
No, it's brutal. And the deeper you look into it, the worse it's no wonder people don't want to look. You know.
And is there? So I mean,
that's not surprising.
Yeah. So the Enlightenment is arguably a secularized version of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yeah.
And that's the argument that Tom Holland makes in Dominion, and Nietzsche made it. Others make it.
Yeah.
Is there a secularized version of the story you're describing that would appeal to our friend Steve Pinker?
No. The secularized version, what we have is the secularized version to the story he's describing. But something, it gets abstracted from the story and corruption happens. And this is part of the reason why you have to keep rehearsing the story itself, because by nature we keep corrupting things. I'm further ahead in The Rest is History Luther than what's on YouTube yet, so I won't play any of it. But they make the observation that part of what happens in modernity is that you begin to have a sense of progress. And progress is one of the key things that comes in with modernity, because very quickly, before you had all of this, what it took to get a book is an incredible amount of money, incredible amount of work. Now suddenly you have it right there, and you have it right there cheaply. And then once the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, you really get the sense that things are getting better. Whereas in the medieval period, generally speaking, they were often always looking back. And they were looking back and said, things started at, let's say, the peak in Genesis 1 and have been downhill since. And when you look at something, let's say, like Renaissance humanism, where Renaissance humanism wants to get back to the sources, wants to get back to the classics, wants to get back there because, they're digging in Rome and they're bringing up these things and they're like, wow. And of course, Constantinople falls and the secular, or not the secular, but the monks, and they're bringing their things from Constantinople, and people are like, wow, so much has been lost. And what happens in Renaissance humanism is sort of a switch, and then suddenly, if we can get back to the sources, now we can sort of flip it around and we can begin the improvement again. And in many ways, that's a lot of what happened. So, what that means, however, is you get this tension, this back and forth between improvement and loss, improvement and loss. Is this betterment or is this corruption? And every time we make changes, we're looking for perspective on this, and often we don't gain perspective until quite a bit after.
And Michael Shermer.
We'll see.
Secularized version of the story you're describing that would appeal to our friend Steve Pinker and Michael Shermer.
We'll see how they respond to this book. I think the answer to that is yes. And the reason I think that is because I think that the intuition that has possessed Western civilization in many forms for thousands of years is that truth in its highest form is a unity. And so I think we'll find that there's no distinction between the religious and the scientific enterprise if they're both properly understood. And I really believe this. I think we're on that cusp. I mean, partly because, for example, the great neuroscientists that I've talked to over the last year, I asked, what's his name? Oh man, now I'm going to forget
That's
his name.
Sapolsky.
That's so terrible. Yeah, no, it wasn't Sapolsky, although I did talk to Sapolsky. He's developed an entropy theory of anxiety. His name will come to me. Anyways, he's the world's most cited neuroscientist at the moment, and he's really quite the genius. And I asked him, this is an odd question. I said, is every object perception a micro-narrative? And he said, yes. Now,
Wow.
it's not easy to understand what that means, but what it means is that the sense data that the empiricists confused with the raw stuff of matter presents itself in its isolated elements as a story. Like a drinking glass is a prop in a play. It's not an object. Right?
See, and this is where I think if we clean up the language a little bit, it's not necessarily that the drinking glass is a story, but the drinking glass has meaning and has value because of these connections to the story. And actually, Peterson got at this with Sam Harris in their first talk when they're talking about Elton John's glass or Elvis's guitar. It's because that glass or that guitar have value because of how they're attached to the story. And the ways that they're attached to the story are narrative. They're invisible. They're, as Vervaeke would say, they're also transjective. They're between. They're not subjective, which is projection. They're not objective, because basically it would be just any other object out in the world and have no meaning and have no connection and just not work.
Right. It's
Right.
not a dead material object. It's a prop in a
Right.
play. It has that's like a Platonic ideal, right? It's very similar to the notion of Platonic ideal. And that means that what presents itself to us in the form of apprehensible objects, so that's the sense data, it's all micro-narrative. It's all within a coherent story, or an incoherent story sometimes, because you can be fragmented. But there's no getting away from the story. And the great neuroscientists, look, this discovery has emerged in 4 different areas. The AI people know it, which is why they started training AI systems in a completely different way. They're not rule-based, right? They're value-based. And now they're very much like human beings because they were trained to identify value. That's exactly how they were trained. The robotics engineers figured this out. The psychologists who were studying perception figured this out, and the postmodernists figured it out. So 4 different scientific disciplines simultaneously converged on the realization that even sense data presents itself as value. You don't derive value from the underlying data. That's wrong. It's back.
And it's exactly right. And this is the key point that sort of blows away new atheism and the naturalist assumptions about the world, because the naturalist assumptions of the world said value was subjective. It's something we project onto Elvis's glass. There's nothing in Elvis's glass. And so subject object, there it is. There's nothing in the glass because the glass is just an object. It's me projecting it. It's like, no, that's not exactly right. It's actually connected between it. And the glass, there's so much stuff in the Luther, the new Luther, the rest is history stuff that I can't wait to get to. But you won't know the glass without the meaning attached to it because, well, I'm mentioning the glass or a glass, and the whole world is full of all kinds of things. Why aren't I mentioning the lens cap? Why aren't I mentioning the wire? Why aren't I mentioning the fan remote? Why aren't I mentioning the little Stream Deck thing? Or how about my keyboard? Or how about my, see, See, but this has value. I mean, let's say, when I shuffle off this mortal coil and leave behind my beautiful insulated sipping cup that I sip from all the time, and thousands of you have watched my videos, and there's Paul taking his. There are thousands of other things like it. There's a little branding. Thousands of other cups like it, but this one is special. It's different. Well, how's it different? You can't break it down. Well, now suddenly it's got a tiny little bit of sacramental quality to it.
And so I would say, this is another elaboration of that to some degree. The biblical library is the repository of the value structure through which we see the world. That's literally the case. Now, you could argue maybe that's...
Now, you can go back to my conversation with Guy Landau and that thing that he drew. And you see, the Bible got in there so old and so deep and so pervasive that it is just built into all of us at a degree that we can. And here's the funny thing. If you talk about, let's say, magic words, and it's not, magic isn't the right word, but it's a popular word, so I'll use it now. Someone who can wield the biblical corpus actually has power in this culture because so much is built in it. And this is something that Jordan Peterson has basically acted out. And so when he walks on stage in 2017 and does his biblical lectures, there it went. But then, of course, it leads to the question, well, the church has had it. Well, why has the church seemed so powerless? Now, it has never been as powerless as people have imagined it is. But it's a fair question.
For the worse, it's like, no, I don't think so. But you could make that argument. But I don't think you can escape from that conclusion. I can't see how. I've tried to escape from it. I haven't been able to.
And so the idea is sort of, this is very profound stuff, because I think if you kind of go, we had this civilization that was oriented towards God as a source of value. God dies. People stop believing in God.
Yeah.
Meaning
power
people stop
and
believing
sex
in God.
come up. Power and sex arise as alternatives.
And we create and we turn ourselves and we fantasize of ourselves as gods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, our atheist and secular friends, Michael Shermer and Steve Pinker, if I were to try to channel them, I think they would say, I believe also in being in service to higher values. They would say things like family, community, rationality, enlightenment. And so I guess one question is whether, because I've been playing with this idea that really we need to get...
Now, I've got the 4 o'clock thing. I believe in these things. How much do you believe in these things? And go back to the sacrifice question. How much are you willing to sacrifice for these things? Well, they might say, I'd be willing to give my life. Well, that's good. But when you say you give your life, what exactly is that exchange look like? Well, I'll be dead. Well, is it sort of an Achilles exchange that maybe you will be remembered, and that maybe you decided that when given the choice of, let's say, living at home on your island or going off to Troy to gain valor, is that the exchange here? And is valor and to being renowned in history? Because, truth be told, Achilles, sort of did it. I'm using him as an illustration. Homer, again, got in early, but here's the thing. How early are we? Hard to know. Homer got in early, so Achilles in that sense is known, and Achilles is sort of the main character of the Iliad. And of course, Achilles and Odysseus, these are the two main characters, and they're very interesting characters. But, okay, so you're going to give your life to this thing. Who's going to remember you? How big of a sacrifice is it? And in many ways, and these are old men we're talking about, they might say, well, it's a sacrifice of maybe a few decades. Oh, okay. Well, it's not nothing. It's not nothing, but, people die in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, might hit 100. Most of us don't, but okay. But suddenly you add something like the resurrection. And all of the stakes increase dramatically in terms of what we do and who we are and how we act. Suddenly, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Eliot. Suddenly, people on a broader scale are saying, "Yeah, I'm willing to do this." And in fact, very seldom does it wind up being some movie moment where someone is in a precipice. And of course, movies are all about sort of building up to these moments where some great sacrifice is going to be made for some great gain. It might be the love of the woman or the salvation of a country, or, superhero movies. Part of why they're popular is because they're going to save the world or they're going to save the future. And you're going to have all of these things going on. But how about for most of us when, why have children? Well, because once you have a child, you're going to start to sacrifice for that child. And you're going to sacrifice your fun. You're going to sacrifice your money. You're going to sacrifice your health. If you're a woman, you're going to do so at the risk, possibly the risk of your life. And you're going to have stretch marks, and it's going to infect, and it's going to impact your sexual appeal. It's going to impact your boobs. It's going to impact your belly. It's going to impact, varicose veins, and on and on and on and on and on. And if you're a man, well, now suddenly you're not going to be able to go out and do all of these things. Now you're going to stay with that woman because those kids are going to punish you if you divorce her. And now you're going to be going and making that money and earning that job and bringing home the bacon. And those kids are going to take so much out of you. And you say, well, why should I even make that tiny little sacrifice? Not a superhero movie, just a tiny little sacrifice. And the resurrection comes and says, that's a worthy thing to do. Sacrifice all of these things in your life for your family. Well, how do I know my children are going to be worth it? They just are, because they're your children. So sacrifice for your children. Well, how do I know they're not going to go bad? They might go bad. Like Peterson says again and again recently, they're sacrifice to the world too. It's nothing but sacrifice all the way down. But with the resurrection, you can make the sacrifice and say, it's well worth it. And in fact, I can make greater sacrifices. I can make them more continually because look at what I'm receiving. What do Pinker and what do the skeptics have? What do they have? Well, they're going to slide off into the big null, the big nothing, the big zero, the big sleep. They wouldn't be remembered anyway. So why make a sacrifice? Well, suddenly now, if you have eternal life, it all gets elongated. And it's like, well, what you're going to have now has cosmic importance, not just for however many generations survive on this world if you're a skeptic, but on and on and on, far as you can imagine.
We can build a political majority to prevent these atrocities from continuing is around the idea of civilization. But I think what you're saying is that that's not good enough, that the civilization has to be in service of something even larger than the civilization itself.
Look, here's the problem with the perspective that Pinker and Shermer might adopt. So let's say family, justice, truth, beauty. Okay, why? Why those? Well, because they all share something. They all share something good. They all partake in the good. Okay, this is a definition. The good they partake in is God. It's a definition. So it's not the summum bonum exactly. It's a slightly different twist on that. It's that the ultimate unity of the spirit that is good is the good that makes itself manifest in all good things. Right, and you see, that's a different way of conception. Now, Pinker and Shermer might say, well, that's not a spirit and you can't have a relationship with it, right? Because that would be the next object. Okay, there's a higher good, but it's impersonal and you can't have a relationship with it. I would say, I think that's a demolishable argument too, because
when he says you can't have a relationship with it, if you go all the way back to some of my early conversations with John Vervaeke, and I talked about Group A and Group B. And I talked about the spirit of finesse versus a spirit of geometry. A relationship is not the spirit of geometry. Every time you try to approach a person with the spirit of geometry, they get offended because they say, I am not geometry. I am a human being. Well, what does that mean? It means I have depth. It means I have meaning. It means I have eternity in my heart. That's what it means. And so the proper way then to approach that source of eternity that is in all human beings, the proper way then to approach is, again, the spirit of finesse. It's a relational posture. And that was essentially the argument I made to John Vervaeke. And, he and I have sort of touched on that back and forth. That is the proper mode. You can look at that in a sort of minimalist argument and say, that's the proper mode. That's exactly how you have to approach it. You don't approach your car that way. You might approach an animal that way to a degree. You definitely approach a human being that way, but now we get into scaling larger bodies and larger entities with agency and a degree of consciousness. And, well, now, of course, when Peterson says by definition, again, he's making fundamentally a minimalist argument that says this is how you have to approach this because it can't be less than that. It has to be, that's sort of the minimum.
The fundamental mode of human apprehension is relationship. Like at the highest level of being, we're a personality. We exist in relationship. So now you might say just because there's human beings doesn't mean there's a spirit with whom we can establish a relationship. And the first thing I would say is that's not absolutely crystal clear. So, don't get the cart ahead of the horse. But I also think you can make a very credible case that the proper way of conceptualizing the manner in which we interact, do and should interact with the highest good is in covenantal relationship. I think that's how people do it. I mean, and I think that's the defining characteristic.
And that is how people do it. Now, covenants are greater than contracts. We do it with respect to contracts, but again, as they go up, it becomes a covenant. Now, a big part of the conversation around marriage today has sort of devolved into the contractual. If you give me this, I'll give you this. And then it's even devolved with respect to children. But with children, it really breaks down quite a bit more because when you start sort of looking at a child contractually, everybody sort of pulls back. In other words, again, this is all built into us and say, oh, so you're going to care for this child for the first certain number of years if this child does what exactly for you? And everybody hears that and backs up and says, that's a horrendous way to approach parenting. And, if again, I recently republished my conversation I had with Fausch. That's even a horrendous way to approach, let's use the biological term, pair bonding. It's a horrendous way to approach it. And, some of the outrage against Andrew Huberman is he's kind of approaching it contractually. And it should be covenantally. It's a much deeper thing. A marriage is a covenant. It's not a contract. Well, what exactly is the difference? The difference is even if you violate it, if AT&T stops giving me service, I will end the contract and think nothing about AT&T. But if my children stop giving me what they ought to give me as their parent, I won't sever the relationship. There might be times to sever a relationship, or at least to put a relationship on pause or in a different category. But I won't sever the relationship. If my wife doesn't give me what I think she owes me as a husband, I'm not going to sever the relationship. Now, that doesn't mean there's never a divorce or divorce is never appropriate given a certain set of circumstances. But what it does mean is that covenants are far more durable than contracts. Contract means AT&T says, we're no longer going to offer you the internet service or the phone service or whatever service that they're offering me and I'm paying for. It's like next month, I'm done with you and I'm looking at Comcast or Verizon or something else. It's going to take 1 month. Not so with my children, not so with my wife, not so with my church, not so even with my friends. A covenantal relationship is something far deeper and more permanent, and we all rely on that because all of us fail.
Of the relationship between man and the transcendent. And so I'll give you an example of that, just a quick example. So, Pinker works. Well, why? Well, when he's working, he's sacrificing the pleasures of the present for the future and maybe even for the community. Okay, why? Well, because because it's a contractual understanding. His understanding is that he exists in relationship with something, and if he makes the proper sacrifices.
Now, we can even differentiate contract. He said contractual. We can even differentiate that from covenantal. If, let's say, Harvard stops paying him, he will sever the contract. But you know what he's going to keep doing? he's going to keep working. Well, who's he working for? What's he working for? He's working for God, at least the God of his own conception. He might not even call it God. He might phrase it as the greater mission or the greater good or human knowledge or some other thing, which is lower, but it's pointing up.
There will be a commensurate return on that offering. Right. So you see what happens in the biblical stories is that you get the idea of sacrifice established very early. There's no difference between that and work. And you might say that the spirit that guarantees the fruits of your labor is God. That's another way of thinking. These are definitions, right? This is the problem with the Enlightenment mentality, is that God was conceptualized. First of all, religion was conceptualized as a scientific theory, which it isn't. And then God was conceptualized as a caricature of the ineffable and dismissed. It's like, no, none of that's accurate. It's not the right starting point. It's the wrong mode of inquiry. See, the Jews, like the Greeks, the Jews posited that at the highest level of value, there was a unity. That's the monotheistic hypothesis. And the alternative is, well, there's nothing. Well, that's not helpful. Or that it's fragmented, and that's also not helpful. So you can't escape from the value hierarchy. You can't escape from the problem of its potential unity. And then you can have a debate about the characterization of that unity. And that's useful, but you're going to find out that the proper characterization is relationship. So here's a way of thinking about it. God, let's say you have a loving relationship with your wife. It's like, well, what you actually have is a relationship with with the highest spirit within her. That's actually the way the relationship lays itself out if it's proper.
So this is from the please Jordan Peterson, please become Roman Catholic guy.
Beauty, your beautiful wife, Tammy. When we last spoke, we talked about her incredible story and her terminal diagnosis, her recovery, miraculous recovery, many say. Many people are asking her today how she's feeling as she's confirmed and brought into the Catholic Church. How are you feeling about it?
Oh, it's been very good for her. So,
has it been good for you? You mentioned unity. Has it been good for your marriage, for the two of you as a couple?
No, it's been great.
Why do you say that?
So, I loved my wife from the moment I laid eyes on her when I was a kid. And if you love someone, it hurts you when you see them deviate from the thing that draws you to them. And since she's pursued her efforts at enlightening herself more thoroughly, and this investigation of Catholicism has been key to that, she's much more who she is. And that's great because I love who she is, and so the more of that, the better. And it's the same thing you want to see. If you have a child that you love, you want to see them become everything they could be, and that's a lot. If they become everything they could be, that's an endless unfolding. And so there isn't anything better than to see that in someone. Now,
that's a covenant. That's what covenant points to. That's what covenant seeks. And that's exactly what he's saying here.
And you have a loving relationship with your wife. It's like, well, what you actually have is a relationship with with the highest spirit within her. That's actually the way the relationship lays itself out if it's proper. And the relationship is actually something transcendent within you relating directly to something transcendent within her. And any genuine conversation is a manifestation of that as well. And that points to
That's the dialogos, pursuing of the logos.
a transcendent reality, right? It's the reality that makes communication itself. That's the logos, man. That's exactly what that is. That's even how it's conceptualized, right? So And it's not just our reality. It's the reality upon which all other realities are predicated, including the scientific. And I think we're at a point where if you look very carefully at the converging evidence, there is no other viable conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, well, Jordan, I mean, do you worry that I mean, you clearly don't think it's enough for there to be agreement on these core values. In other words, if you go family, truth, beauty, progress, you don't think that's enough. You think there needs to be convergence on a higher value than those. But don't you worry that that's going to reduce the size of your that's going to alienate allies and reduce the size of the coalition that we need in order to resist totalitarianism?
I think the problem with the fundamentalists and the conservatives is that they shake their stick and they hit the rocks with their rod to make the water come forward, right? Well, that stops you from entering the promised land, right? So what's the way forwards? You invite. And no, I think there's a way of formulating this story that is purely invitational. It's like, and the proper offering would be, this way of looking at things is.
Now, it's purely invitational, but it isn't purely presentational. It has to be an invitation to participation, and you start with a little participation and it grows. And he's going to talk about ARC. I think this is where he talks about ARC. And that, I think, was part of the problem, in that we are inundated with presentation. And part of the reason video games ate the lunch of movies, and part of the reason certain kinds of movies that lent themselves to participation more than mere presentation, is because we participate into these things. We don't just see them and say yes. And this has been, in many ways, the argument that he's made about, do you believe in God? We're just talking here. It has to do with, so there's Richard Dawkins, of course, has this piece on civilizational Christianity versus, let's say, belief or confessional. And of course, he's got this little thing that's on Twitter that I reposted on Twitter where, he's a civilizational Christian. Well, okay. Well, your big beef on Unbelievable back in 2018 was civilizational Christians in North America. But you want civilizational Christians, yada, yada, yada. Now, it was interesting in this Substack, you get all the way down to the bottom, and this person very aptly says, there's a fourth category, practicing Christians, meaning one who regularly participates in the ritual and communal practices of an organized group of Christians. Does Ali attend any church services? She says she does. Does she pray at night before she bed? She says she does. So it's practicing. And so again, that's the participation. And in terms of our formation, just the presentational and saying yes is insufficient. It's the participational. Now, at some point, we're going to have to get into one of the big elements of the Protestant Reformation, because the argument, part of what's happening now as we probably get to the point of being able to settle something of the Protestant Reformation with one another, is because we're going to have to get past something where the Protestants looked at what was happening in the Catholic Church and said, there's too much BS going on in there. It's not sufficiently participational. And so in a sense, the Protestants reacted and said, no, it's presentational. And a lot of Protestantism has been presentational. That doesn't mean, again, that none of the other traditions do presentation. All of them do. But in terms of the emphasis, if you look at this focal point argument that I've made with respect to Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Protestantism, and now I think we're going to see much more of the conversational, participational as we develop this. And again, I think this has always been there and been true all along, and I'm running out of time.
So much richer than any of the alternatives that, like, the problem is you got to hoist your cross, right? You got to bear your responsibility. That's the price. But I think that's an illusory price in some sense, because you're going to sacrifice everything you have to something. Like, that's the nature of life, right? You're going to exhaust your life in the service of something.
Right. Shermer and Pinker are going to die. You got to serve someone. They are going to die. They're going to spend their life one way or another. How will you spend it?
It might be a multitude of things. So the sacrificial part, you don't get to choose that. You get to choose in service of what?
Well, they would say, I think if you were to say, I think we would have I feel like we have to resist totalitarianism. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do you get to a majority? Seems to me, family, truth, beauty, care, all these values that we have, that they are where I think we can attract a lot of people. I think we get to God, faith, and I think we start to lose people.
Look, we've been having that problem with this ARC enterprise, right? Because we have 6 core domains that are very similar to the ones that you just laid out, right? Core values, right? And we've been arguing back and forth continually about how much you leave the divine unity, that what is the source of those things, so to speak, implicit versus explicit. And the answer is, we don't know, right? We don't know. Yeah, but I certainly do understand, I believe.
And I think, again, moving at it from the presentational to the participation, the participation, to participate with each other. I think there's the movement, because at some point we all act out of things that are belief, and part of what we're dealing with is very much this question.
That you don't insist upon it or use force. That's where you get the totalitarian alliance between the religious spirit, so to speak, and the totalitarian state. That's the sort of things that people like Dawkins object to, right? And rightly so. But look, one example. See, I don't know how anybody can dispute the idea that the ground of community is sacrifice, is self-sacrifice. Like, that's right. I mean, obviously, when you mature, you give up.
Well, I want to go back to this one, because again, it's participation instead of presentation.
Have you seen? I'm curious what you see the role of artists being in this, because it's the world of apologetics is usually a world, like you said, of scientists, of kind of theologians, often very systematic thinkers. And so, how do you see artists playing a role in what you're describing?
I think that what I would love to see is artists, and I'm again not the first person to say this, but artists who are Christians stopping doing quote unquote Christian art that is basically just a knockoff of secular art, but with Jesus in the frame, kind of thing. I just think we need to do great art, because at any time you do great art, true art, you are representing Christ at some level, and to that extent, I just want folk who do find themselves, who do call themselves Christian, to just do their art as well as they can, and to sort of just to put it out in the public sphere, and to, I mean, one of the things what's been fascinating is doing this new documentary podcast series, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. I ended up, for various reasons, moving on from hosting the Unbelievable show about a year ago, and it different to the kind of these more sort of just kind of brains on legs debates that I hosted for many years. It's kind of like people suddenly feel able to engage with it at a different level, because they feel like they're entering into a story. So many of the people who've got back to me, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, have said, yeah, I feel like this resonates with me. I feel like this is telling my story. I kind of, had all those memories.
Again, it's the participation. And I think art doesn't have to put little fish on everything. Of course, if you here in America, half of the listeners aren't in America. Here in America, every now and then you can find like the Christian Business Directory. And, well, I'm only going to hire Christians to do this. Well, okay, it's a fine choice if you want to. But I always look at this. I always look at those things with suspect, because it's like I would rather have, the competence directory, which is why you have Yelp or Angie's List or all these other things, because when I hire a plumber, a Christian would be nice. And usually we tend to hire through our relationships, and those are probably going to be fairly Christian. But ARC is not only having to tell a better story, but ARC has to demonstrate in its various fields of endeavor, whether they be art or economics or politics, they have to demonstrate their competence. Because again, doing so without tacking a little fish on the outside says, and it demonstrates confidence that, in fact, that hierarchy that Peterson was talking about is real. Now I want to bring one more video in here that I'm not going to have a lot of time to play through. It's on a very small channel, and it was sent to me by someone else who sort of runs this outfit. They're up there in near Moscow, Idaho, and they're sort of critiquing the idea that Doug Wilson has sort of put on the table of mere Christendom is, I think, a really nice framing of both. Peterson says, of course, this was done in America. Well, what was done in America was Protestant mere Christendom. And in a sense, what happened was that America has been very welcoming of eventually, not initially, eventually, of Catholics and Orthodox and other Christians into it, and even non-Christians. And so when Schellenberger keeps coming round and round again, and when Jordan Peterson is wrestling with this with respect to ARC, I think they're really talking about an idea of mere Christendom. Now, Doug Wilson's application of it seems quite suspect, and this is really a fine video presentation on that. I'll play a little bit of it.
Jonathan McIntosh is a fellow of humanities at New St. Andrews College, where he teaches courses on political and economic philosophy. Tonight, he's bringing us a talk titled Reflections on Mere Christendom. So please welcome Jonathan.
All right, good evening, everyone. Actually, as I often do, I retitled my talk. So the current version is More Mere Than Mere Christendom. And my talk this evening is on Pastor Douglas Wilson's latest book, came out earlier this summer, titled Mere Christendom. And I did invite him to be here this evening, and he was out of town, so he was not able to be here. In this paper, I want to explain what Pastor Wilson's concept of mere Christendom is, and despite my agreement with what I take to be the foundation of the Mere Christendom project, I want to talk about some of what I think are the philosophical and conceptual problems, what some of the philosophical and conceptual problems are with the concept of mere Christendom as Pastor Wilson has characterized it. Well, first, what is mere Christendom? This is a term Pastor Wilson has coined. I think he's been using it for about 12 or 13 years or so, to describe what the next Christendom, or model of Christian society and civilization, ought and may be expected to look like as the new and improved successor to the old Christendom that stretched from basically the beginning of the Middle Ages to our current secular order of the last 100 years or more. As Pastor Wilson himself has defined it, the term mere Christendom means, quote, a network of nations bound together by a formal, public, civic acknowledgement of the Lordship of Jesus Christ and the fundamental truth of the Apostles' Creed. I, Pastor Wilson speaking here, mean a public and formal recognition of the authority of Jesus Christ that repudiates the principles of secularism and that avoids both hard sectarianism and easy latitudinarianism, both, end quote. In another place, Pastor Wilson refers to mere Christendom as, quote, a distinctively Christian civil order, one that is not limited to just one nation, end quote, and which is the political fruit of the church carrying out its, quote, assigned task to disciple all the nations, teaching them obedience to Christ, end quote. The non-sectarian ecumenical character of this mere Christendom is stressed in this comment. quote, "But when doctrinaire Christians get power, one of their temptations is that they want to impose their whole system down to the jots and tittles. We must refrain from doing this. But we must refrain from doing this because Jesus demands that we refrain. This is what I mean.
Again, this is what Peterson talks about in terms of being invitational.
By the mere Christendom," end quote. So one of Pastor Wilson's principal exemplars of mere Christendom is the pattern of denominational pluralism at the time of the American founding, of which he writes this, quote, "Our republic was part of Christendom. The fact that numerous Christian denominations were involved meant that we provided the beta testing for a mere Christendom," end quote. The Americanism of mere Christendom is made even more specific in his statement that the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, with its prohibition of an established religion and protection of religious liberty, free speech and free press, and the right of assembly, quote, "provides us with a model of mere Christendom," end quote.
And it's important to note that the word God does not appear in the American Constitution. It does appear in the Declaration of Independence. It does not appear in the Constitution.
This then, in Pastor Wilson's own words, is at least part of what mere Christendom is about. And insofar as it looks forward to a future in which human societies, including their culture and their political organization, have been radically transformed in this life by the gospel, I think it describes something that every Christian should both desire and labor to bring about.
Now, I'm running out of time, but he's basically going to say Wilson doesn't really pull it off in his book, and nobody trusts him to actually do it. Or nobody, well, not only not do it, but nobody trusts him to basically, aren't you really, basically on the by virtue of the kind of rhetoric he tends to use, people are much more suspicious that it's going to slide into totalitarianism. And in fact, a lot of the whole debate about Christian nationalism is out of anxiety and fear that Christians will somehow get sectarian and lord it over. Now, I don't think this approach is wholly alien when Jonathan Peugeot talks about these things, when he talks about a Christian emperor. Of course, you're going to have difficulty figuring out, oh, how exactly is this emperor going to get into the imperial throne? And what's the virtue? Because generally speaking, Constantine conquered, Diocletian had, basically 4 thrones over the Roman Empire, and Constantine consolidates them, and Constantine could be pretty brutal in his grabbing power. And generally speaking, emperors do. Charlemagne, was not a man to be trifled with, and on and on and on and on. So even when I look at, let's say, the imagined monarchical path to this, generally speaking, these monarchical paths themselves are strewn with blood. So, but what's happening in the culture, obviously, is this. So, of course, this little tidbit making the rounds on Twitter.
I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's truth that
and so we all have to go according to your feelings? I mean, that's the obvious retort.
Statistically, the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I've come...
And they were all turned into mosques? Hagia Sophia?
Myself
and of course, this is getting a lot of play on Twitter. These are the questions that we're very much dealing with. This is a very interesting video on Peterson and the power of the Easter message, and he then basically says, I'm a tweener, I'm in between things, and so basically says to the Catholics, I'm not going to join you, probably not going to join anyone. And so he's going to be, in that way, he sort of remains a secularist. And in some ways, maybe people will say, well, I can trust him more than I can trust Doug Wilson, because Doug Wilson has a pony in the race. But anyway, so I am out of time. Got to start the cage match. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching.